Hi, my name is Fiona Meechan, and I'm a leadership specialist. I work for myself. I'm the director at Oak Tree Personal Development, and I also am an executive education associate with the University of Manchester.
Brilliant. So, and your research has all been on compassion in leadership, is that right?
Yeah. So compassionate work and compassionate leadership in particular. Yeah. So I think it's important to start off with kind of being really clear about what compassion is, and why are we even talking about compassion in the first place. So Karen Armstrong is a religious historian, and she studied all of the world's spiritual, ethical, religious traditions. And she's found that the one thing that underpins all of them across the world is compassion. So that when I found that out, it really made me think, this is something that is really core to humanity. And so I dug into it a bit deeper. And when you look at things like developmental psychology, we see that even the youngest children demonstrate compassionate and caring behaviours and are drawn to those who do display those as well. And we know also from things like archaeology and anthropology that people have been compassionate towards each other and cared for each other since the beginning of time. That's how we've survived as a species. So for me, compassion is really core to us as human beings, as individuals, and as a species. And I think just to keep it really simple, when we don't have compassion, we don't do well as humans. And when compassion is around us, we thrive. So it's a really positive trait for us to have. So what am I talking about when we talk about compassion? So there's lots of different definitions out there, lots of different words used to describe compassion, things like kindness, care, benevolence, love, sympathy, all of those things. It's all dead helpful to kind of situate it. But again, I like to keep it really simple. So I've got a little bit of a compassion equation, if you like, which is empathy plus action equals compassion. And I think the action part is the really important part here. It's about taking action to improve the circumstances of other people, basically. And I mostly talk about compassion in relation to work and compassionate leadership. And so for me, compassion applied in work is really about bringing our full humanity to work so we can deliver continuous improvement, because compassion is about improving circumstances in a sustainable way. Because when we have compassion, we all do better, and it can be a really sustainable approach. So with all of that in mind, first and foremost, why do we need compassion in times of crisis? I think, firstly, we need it in times of crisis because ethically it's the right thing to do. We do better as humans when we have compassion, and when we don't have compassion, we suffer. Okay, so first and foremost, it's an ethical issue for me. And in addition to that, there are lots and lots of other benefits of compassion as well. So yes, absolutely, we need compassion at times of crisis. And I actually firmly believe, based on lots and lots of evidence, that we need compassion at all times. And we need compassion in work as well as in other parts of our lives. There's a whole host of reasons why we don't have compassion in work, but I won't go into those at the minute. I wrote a document called the Compassionate Work Toolkit a few years ago, which is accessible out there, and we can pop a link to that for people to have a look at it. It's about how you embed compassion at work. And I start to touch in there about why we don't have it. But there are ways around it, and there are very practical solutions for how we can implement compassion at work. So thinking about compassion in a crisis, there's a great document from the Army called Leading Through Crisis from 2020. And near the start of that, there's a great paragraph which talks about, crisis brings extremes of experiences, emotions and behaviours. So basically, crisis amplifies the human experience, doesn't it? And it also goes on to say that failure will rapidly escalate if you don't look after your people and look after yourself. And for me, those are really two absolutely core parts of compassion. Look after your people and look after yourself. So we need self-compassion as well as compassion for others. That whole analogy, if you think about when you get on a flight and they ask you to fit your own oxygen mask before helping others, that's real. You need to be in a strong place so you can be compassionate towards others. And actually, once you're into crisis, if you haven't already been doing those things, it's almost too late, really. It's never completely too late. You can pull it back a bit, but really, we should be building compassion in peacetime to benefit in crisis. So there's loads of evidence out there, tons of research, and more coming out all the time, actually. Over the last 10 years, there's been a real increase in looking at compassion and compassionate work. And the benefits of compassionate work, when we have it on a day-to-day basis, are really profound. And there's loads of evidence to show that there's benefits for individuals when we have compassionate work. So people benefit from more ethical and moral leadership. They build resilience, you have more positive emotions, job satisfaction. So great health outcomes for individuals and great outcomes for organizations as well. So when we have compassionate work, we have more trust in the organization, more organizational commitment, reduced turnover and absenteeism, more innovation, collaboration, effectiveness, all those great things. So the benefits for individuals are that it bolsters well-being, and that leads to benefits for organizations, because when we feel well, we can do well, we can do better, and that improves productivity and quality. And there's just tons of evidence. That's like a rapid summary of loads of evidence which shows that from all around the world as well. This is it's not centric to any one country. And generally, when organisations do better, communities also do better. So if we look beyond the benefits within organisations, we can see that there's also benefits to service users for all sorts of businesses. And one of the most stark areas, I suppose, is in relation to healthcare. And again, tons of evidence out there, as you might expect. But again, keeping it simple, we know that if we deliver healthcare services in a compassionate way, people are more likely to stick to treatment pathways that are beneficial to them. They're more likely to recover more quickly from illness and from operations. And without being overdramatic about it, people are less likely to die when we have compassionate service delivery. That's just a stark fact. If you look at any of the inquiries into some of the awful failures in compassion that we've had, Mid Staffordshire is a really good example of that. Those inquiries make disturbing reading, don't they? When there have been failures in compassion and humanity. But the opposite is also true. We know that when we deliver with compassion, people thrive. So that's why it's important on a day-to-day basis. And then going back to crisis, so holding in mind that quote from the army document, where crisis brings extremes of experiences and emotions and behaviours. You need to look after yourself, you need to look after your people. There's loads of evidence out there, again, studies of organisations who have gone through various crisis situations, various major events. So the big ones that everyone will know about, of course, the 9/11 attacks in 2001. In the US, there was a big flooding event in Brisbane in 2011 in Australia. And there's lots of other situations which have been looked at, including more recently the COVID-19 pandemic, of course, in 2020, 21. So, and over all of that time, it's been consistently found that when organisations respond to staff in a compassionate way at times of crisis, where they put individual human needs before organizational needs around things like finance and performance, there's huge payback for the business. And businesses benefit, and it's again, it's amplified. The benefits are amplified. So if you think about all of those benefits from day-to-day compassionate work, all of that is amplified. So people, if they're treated compassionately at times of crisis, it's been found that they then have more pride and gratitude towards the organisation, so leads to better organisational commitment. They have better psychological connections to one another, and so that increases resilience and increases teamwork. It improves teamwork. People are more likely to recover more quickly from the crisis situation when they've been treated compassionately. And it's also been found even that people, when they come back, have improved output and productivity compared to before the event. So ethically, it's absolutely the right thing to do to treat people with compassion, because we don't want people to suffer, and it generates better productivity for organisations. So it's a real win-win. I'm currently working with a group of managers in the NHS, and we've had discussions about learning from the pandemic in particular. And somebody asked me, was the pandemic a good excuse to park compassionate leadership because that's what happened? No, no, my goodness, no. At times of crisis, that's exactly when you need it. And there's loads of studies to show that organisations tend to revert to very old school managerial approaches at times of crisis, so they can get more authoritarian, more dictatorial. But when they do that, all that's going to do is heap a load more stress on top of staff who are already stressed and distressed because of the crisis. And the studies in Brisbane with the flooding showed that when organisations did that, they put profit over people, staff just withdrew. So there was an example of an organisation where staff are sitting at their desks and they can see the floodwaters rising outside the window, and the manager saying, "No, you can't leave early. You're contracted to stay till 5 o'clock." And of course it just switches people off. People become emotionally detached from the organisation. They feel let down. They get angry. They lose motivation. They withdraw discretionary effort, and often they leave. So it has a long-term negative impact on organisations if they don't treat people with compassion at times of crisis. So it's important to recognise what happens when we don't have it, as well as when we do. So really the most successful organisations, again, from research, we know can support staff through crisis if they've really built those compassionate leadership and cultures and policies in advance. So building peacetime, we need compassion all the time, benefit in crisis, and then the benefits are amplified in crisis. Yeah, so if you're authentic about it, it means that you're human, and it shows people that you're human. And generally people are just drawn to that. If we're authentic human beings acting as decent human beings in a decent way, it resonates with other human beings. And that's because, back to that initial point, compassion is a fundamental human trait and we all need it and we all benefit from it, even if some people like to think that they don't. But that's another story. The reason I mentioned the need to be authentic is because people can very often see through it. People can see through fake behavior. So if people are talking about compassion, but they're not living it, those messages can often fall flat because people can see through it. I worked with a senior manager once, oh my goodness, who revelled in making staff cry, and even members of the public. Just an awful individual. I think we've all come across bad managers, haven't we? But after one of the major terrorist incidents in the UK a few years ago, I saw that person on TV talking about, how important it is to show compassion to the community. And, I watched and I just thought, you wouldn't know compassion if it bit you on the bum. They were just using it as a buzzword. And maybe I was just live to it because I know that individual. But genuinely, when I was watching it, I thought, you look dead behind the eyes. It just wasn't convincing. So I'm sure I'm not the only person who noticed that, So that need for authenticity is critical. And again, it's backed up by evidence. So there's research to show that if organisations say they're compassionate, but their main driver is about improving performance and improving profits, then staff will see through that and they're likely to resist, and they detach from organisations emotionally, physically. They distance themselves from organisations. The flip side of that is if the compassion is ethically sound, if it's driven genuinely by that principle of really valuing people as human beings first and foremost, with a view to reducing suffering and creating improvements, that can actually build trust in organisations. It builds commitment, it builds loyalty. And in relation to communications, there was a piece of research recently in relation to, I don't know if you remember the big freeze that happened in Texas in 2021. And they looked at online communications from public agencies out to the public. And they found that those messages which were compassionate, firstly, they got increased public engagement. And secondly, they generated much more positive emotions amongst people, which then improves well-being. And that then led to higher confidence in those public agencies, more support for them from the public, which then made it easier for them to do their jobs. So it had a real impact. So fundamentally, when you're showing compassion when you're communicating in a crisis, if you do it authentically, it essentially shows people that you have recognized what they're going through, you've felt that suffering, and that's the empathy part from the equation. And it can show people that you are responding to help them in those circumstances, and that's the action part of that compassion equation. So people will feel heard, they'll feel seen, they'll feel understood. And those are all really basic psychological human needs. And when we meet those human needs, we all do better as a result. Brilliant question. Okay, thank you. I think the first thing, first and foremost, we have to hold on to the concept that compassion is a fundamental human trait. And we all do better when we have it. You know, when we have compassion for ourselves and when we have compassion for others, we all do better. We can thrive because it's essential to our being. And when we don't have it, we suffer. So let's recognize how important it is to us as individuals and collectively. And let's bring it into all aspects of our lives, not just friends and families, which is where you might find it more. Let's bring it into all aspects of our lives. So I think that's the first thing, recognize how important it is and how normal and natural it is actually. Secondly, I think there are a couple of things about compassion which are really great actually, which means it's absolutely achievable. The first thing is that small acts of kindness and compassion can make a huge difference to people, you know, so we can start small and it's definitely achievable. And it has a great ripple effect as well through emotional contagion. So obviously when you are compassionate to somebody, that person benefits, but we also know from research that you benefit as well from being compassionate. And we know that people witnessing compassionate acts also benefit. It makes them feel better too. So there's a real ripple effect with compassion. So you can start small and make a big difference. And like any skill, you know, we can cultivate it and improve it with practice. So building compassion in all areas of our lives, including in the workplace, is really doable. It's eminently achievable. And that gives me really great optimism for the future. So that's number two. I sneaked in a couple of things there. The third thing is back to compassion in times of crisis, and it's that principle of build in peacetime, benefit in crisis. The benefits of compassion in work are, you know, are huge anyway, but they're amplified at times of crisis. So start now and get the basics right, and then you'll benefit when we get to a time of crisis. That would be my summary, I think. So I'd just like to add again, I'd encourage people to have a look at the Compassion at Work Toolkit, which is out there. So I wrote that on behalf of the National Forum for Health and Wellbeing at Work a few years ago. And there's just some really great hints and tips in there about how you can really embed compassion in the workplace through all sorts of different processes. So it's very practical, it's free, it's out there. If you just have a look on ResearchGate, for my name, you will find it. So just really encourage people to have a look at that really and to use it. That's the main thing.